So first of all, how honored, really, Dale, for you inviting me here in your group, just to be a part of this, what you're doing here in Minnesota to bring together social and emotional learning. It's so multiple levels. So the idea that you're bringing together policy, university research, practitioners all together with a common direction, and I have to say it's rare that I see that from all places I go. So I really, really admire all the work you're doing and hoping that I can help in any way that I can in letting you know what is happening. Three things I'm going to let you know about me. One, I started off as a teacher. I was a middle school teacher, 7th and 8th grade French, and then worked as a teacher for at-risk adolescents for a number of years. They taught me everything, so this idea of going from theory to practice or research to practice has never been true for me. I've always gone the other way, and so I think Gil's emphasis on the idea it has to be a two-way street and how we inform each other has to be. I think that's one thing, and I think the idea that we have to work together to make these differences, so coming from that. The second thing you should know is, although I am Canadian now and I do speak some Canadian, can you pick up my Canadian? I am from Chicago. And I was born and raised in Chicago. I go back there all the time. Midwestern, and in fact, my niece Chelsea went to University of Minnesota, and so I feel a real connection to Minnesota as well as just being from that Midwest. And then the final thing, just to let you know, I've been a researcher. I've been sort of chipping away at this stuff, but it really, really became important to me, or I became so tenacious with doing this in 1996, and that was when Griffin was born, my oldest son, who's now a senior in high school, and I have Gray, who's 14. So I just want to say how much, trying to help change the world, as all of you are doing, is really part of my mission. So I'm just so happy I could be here with you in doing this. And I have to see if I could get the slides. Oh, good. So I'm going to give you just a brief overview of social and emotional learning. You've kind of heard about it, but it's sort of putting it in a common field. Why now and what now? What do we need to do? I'm going to talk about a bit of the recent science. I think that really will help us in shaping and rationalizing why this is important. And then finally, I'm going to talk about this middle years development instrument. Now, I have a quiz for you. You didn't realize you'd get a test during this session, did you? No? So, here's a quote. Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Who said it? Some of you know already. Not Einstein. I know, everybody thinks it's Einstein. I know, I have to Google that. I don't know. Who? It's old, it's like, I'll give you a hint. A long, long time ago. No, quick, wait. Aristotle. Okay. So this notion of social and emotional learning, or educating mind and heart, has been around for a long, long time. However, I would argue that just the past 10 years or so, the science, particularly the neuroscience, has brought this to, risen to a more prominent position. So what I'm going to do is just show you, just because I think where I am in the program, you need a little video kind of break. I'm going to show you a short video that was put together by some people I work with at the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education that's in Vancouver, British Columbia. How many of you have heard of the Dalai Lama? Heard? Okay. Oh, there you go. The Dalai Lama Center is about educating the heart. It's a secular organization that's focusing on educating the hearts and minds of children. And they've now trying to figure out, how do we get this to the public? So they got together with these really cool young people to be able to put together some animation, and got a really neat spoken word poet to put this all together. So let's see what you think.
When a child is born, we do everything we can to protect them, nurture them, love them. A child's heart and mind are fragile. As they grow, we want to teach them everything we know. We send them to school to fill their minds with wonderful knowledge, to give them the tools they need for life. At school, they get a taste of what things are like in the world outside. There is friendship, romance, disappointment, embarrassment, discrimination, and bullying. But are the tools we give them enough to prepare them for this world? We have an enormous responsibility and an amazing opportunity. If we truly want to prepare them for the world outside, we must also educate the heart. Because to navigate the world outside with compassion, acceptance, and tolerance, we need to teach them compassion, acceptance, and tolerance. This can begin in our schools, and it can start today. It can happen at hockey practice, dance class, at day camps, and music lessons. And it's already happening around the world with astonishing results. If we want our children to grow into socially and emotionally capable young people, we must ask for a balanced education that puts importance on educating both the mind and the heart.
And so two things. So first of all, I'm not going to, usually I ask you to think about what were the key messages. And a lot of people bring up the issue that this is already happening, that it happens not just in school, but out of school context, that we all play a role and that we need to teach these skills. I will say two things. It's on the Dalai Lama Center website, and so you could go and actually do it. But if anybody wants, I'll make it available so everybody could have a copy of the video just to use. I know a lot of schools with which I work and community organizations like to use it when they're doing a short presentation, at least to instigate the conversation, because there's so many pieces that can be communicated in there. So now I just want to start with, because if I don't get through everything, my take-home messages. What I really want you to, what I see as the key messages you need to think about. First, environments and contexts are critical. Creating caring environments and relationships in which children and youth feel supported, loved, and nurtured. Second, that you could provide children with skills, teaching these skills, to learn these skills in different contexts. Not in the same way that, write empathy in a sentence 5 times, but really to teach them in situations where they can learn these skills. And finally, and one thing we haven't seen addressed a lot, and it's just emerging in the literature, is that how we have to support the well-being of the adults who care for the children. And that, to me, is so critical, rather than just say, do this, and especially if we heard how many schools are feeling. One of the pressures is too many things on my plate. I have too much. We have to support the adults. And in fact, interestingly, there was one study that looked at 10,000 children in teacher classrooms, and they looked at how does teacher stress and well-being actually trickle down or ripple down to student well-being. And they found that teachers they use this stress contagion hypothesis, the idea that stress can be contagious, and that if you're really stressed, it actually influences those. And they found that teachers in classrooms who reported high levels of stress and feeling unsupported by their colleagues and lack of resources had students in their classroom with higher internalizing and externalizing disorders. So again, it emphasizes we have to pay attention to supporting the adults. So why now? Basically, the youth today, and I'd love to hear what the youth panel, what they have to say about these kinds of things, but the notion that too many children and youth in our society are not reaching their potential. And it's not just about reducing risk, it's about encouraging thriving. We know there's a number of problems, changes, and challenges in our society, including poverty, decreased empathy, increased mental illness that Gil was talking about, bullying, as well as increased stress among our young people. Sorry, I wanted you to think about. So what are some of the problems, just to think for a moment, what are some of the problems that youth in your communities are facing in terms of their own well-being, and how we have to really talk to them to ask them? So what now? I argue a focus on what differences can we make to make a difference. And I think this is part of this initiative that's happening. What can we do to make a difference? Promoting resiliency, to me, is at the top. The idea of promoting these protective factors, these factors that all of us need to help us weather stress and adversity. But we also know, oh, have you heard that term social and emotional learning yet? SEL, yes? Okay, so it's a growing movement, and just to sort of briefly, the person who kind of instigated part of it was Daniel Goleman when he wrote the book in 1995. Here, I just skipped through him. Wrote the book in 1995, Emotional Intelligence. How many of you have heard of that book? It was a bestseller, and he and Eileen Growald Rockefeller started this organization called CASEL, or the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning. And some people would call it the mothership of SEL, and they're really working hard to do a lot of initiatives. CASEL identified these. How many of you have seen this before? The 5 dimensions of CASEL: self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And they sort of encompass all these different dimensions that we all need to be successful in school and in life. The conceptual framework of CASEL is really that it isn't just the schools, it isn't just the families, it isn't just the community, but it's a coordinated effort to all lead to social and emotional learning and these healthy outcomes: academic success, health, good social relationships, as well as engaged citizens. And I just want to remind people, how many of you are associated with, how many of you are associated with some sort of school system or education kind of thing? Did any of you ever heard of John Dewey? You've heard of this guy, John Dewey. What is the aim of education? Is it just academic achievement? Is that the aim? Is that why we started public education? No, it was about creating participatory, caring, democratic citizens. And that is really the goal of education, is human and social development. And we have to keep on, I think we have to remind ourselves of that aim, which really looks at these kind of framework. We also know there's a academic, social, and emotional learning act that has been put through Congress. From what I hear, though, from Jim Shelton said basically that it's kind of stalled, right? But anyways, it's there. You can go see Tim Ryan put it through as a bipartisan bill. So some of the science, I'm just going to give you just a few sort of tidbits. And I'm providing this in 2 ways. One is that I think that you need to know the science, but I also give this to you for all of you who want to go forward to convince others that this is the place to go. So you could use all my slides, anything you want. So here's some of the science. We know that social and emotional skills are malleable. They can be taught. It isn't like they're just genetic and you can't learn them. We know there's also research that shows that social and emotional learning programming, that is, children who get social and emotional learning programming in schools or even after-school programs, that they can benefit. So one of the studies most often cited is a meta-analysis by Joe Durlak and colleagues of 213 studies of over 270,000 students. And they compared those students who got social and emotional learning programs and those students who were in control conditions, who didn't have any. And what they found was remarkable. They found actually that students who received social and emotional learning programs not only increased in social and emotional skills and improved attitude, it's going on its own, improved attitude, but there was an 11 percentile gain in academic achievement when you received a social and emotional learning program, as well as reduced risk for failure of conduct problems, aggressive behavior, and emotional distress. Now, when you just focus on academics, you don't see the gains in social and emotional development. To me, it's so clear. It's a no-brainer. Like, where would you put your efforts into social and emotional learning if you're going to see the increased academic achievement as well? We also know, I just put this in to make you hungry, SEL is sticky, meaning there was a study done that actually by David Hawkins and colleagues out of University of Washington, and they looked at kids who had been in social and emotional learning programs when they were in elementary school. And they followed them till they were 24 and 27 to find out if, in fact, 15 years later, any effect of social and emotional learning program makes a difference. And they compared again those kids who got the social and emotional learning programs when they were in elementary school and compared them to the control kids, those kids who didn't receive anything. And what they found was not only did children who received in adulthood, young adulthood at 24 and 27, have increased economic attainment, increased educational attainment, fewer mental health problems, but higher levels of community involvement and volunteering. Again, this notion of social and emotional learning has long-lasting effects. It doesn't just stop there. And then there's this whole thing, neuroscience. Do you know we've learned more about the brain in the past decade than we have throughout all of history? And we know that social and emotional learning and neuroscience, how our brain works and how we feel actually affects. Now, we know, for instance, that there's a longitudinal study followed children from birth to 30 years of age and found the single best predictor of how you manage your money, your mental health problems, and how well you do in relationships is predicted by self-control during childhood. And this was a study by Terry Moffat et al. Now, there's another study that actually looks at what do you wish for your children. If I asked you, what do you wish for your children's future? Your children in your community, what would you say? What would be your number one wish? What? I can't hear it. Okay. I planted you back there, right? Happiness. So a study across 48 countries of over 11,000 adults asked, what's your number one wish for your children's future? Happiness. But do we know how to promote it? Do we even know what happiness is? Interestingly, there's a whole new field of positive psychology just trying to unpack how do we promote these positive human emotions. That happy people, or optimism, for example. Optimistic people, you know, the ones who wear the rose-colored glasses, the glass half full, are somewhat delusional. They live longer, recover better from health problems, have better relationships. And we know something about these positive emotions. And I'll give you another, how many of you are students or teachers? You know, okay, I'll give you a tip now. The research finds that when a teacher is in a positive mood, has a more happy, a positive mood, and they're grading papers that are subjective, they give higher grades. So, there you go. There's something to this. I thought you could pass that along to people you know. Okay, so can SEL be measured? And I'm thinking you're saying yes. Gil provided a very compelling case, and I'm going to talk about it from this context in British Columbia, Canada, just to let you know. So Vancouver, how many of you ever been to Vancouver? Oh, good, you know where it is. It's like above Seattle. It rains a lot. We don't get snow, just in the mountains. BC is actually changing the way that we look at education. They've developed a curriculum and assessment framework, K-12. We're revising the entire K-12 curriculum and assessment framework. We actually have one common core across the entire province. And what we've done is and I've been an advisor to the ministry on this, is decided to move to 3 common competencies. New Zealand is also doing this, and other countries. And the 3 competencies include a thinking competency that includes critical thinking, creative thinking, and reflective thinking, a personal and social competency that includes positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social awareness and responsibility, which includes things like practicing democratic rights and responsibility and valuing diversity and defending human rights. And then finally, a communication competency. And these 3 competencies are going to be integrated within all K-12 subject areas. They're being piloted right now, but it just provides you a bit of a context that if we're doing this in British Columbia, we better know how to assess it. The place that I work, I'm at UBC in the Faculty of Education, but I also work with an organization called the Human Early Learning Partnership, which is an interdisciplinary organization on campus in the School of Population and Public Health. And we're into really monitoring child development. And I'm not going to tell you about these different ones, except that we're just linking and trying to look at human development or well-being at the population level, not just at the individual school level or the individual child level. And we're linking them all and connecting them to health data as well as all the education data as well. So what I'm now going to talk about in the next few minutes is the Middle Years Development Instrument, or the MDI. And it's a population-based measure, which is like like a census. So it's basically ours is for 4th grade and 7th grade students. So in a district like Vancouver that has approximately 4,000 4th graders, every student completes it. And it's done as a self-report survey, and it's also done in about 1 to 2 class periods electronically, and we have paper surveys as well. It focuses on strengths, thriving, and assets. As well, the MDI was developed to look at 4 dimensions: development of the whole child, perspectives of children, relationships are seen as central, and finally, multiple contexts. It's about children's well-being inside and outside of school. We're also aligning it with the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child about Article 12, that children have a right to be listened to and give opinions about matters that affect them. I just put this quote in because I love it. Has anyone seen this quote before? Every child requires someone in his or her life who is absolutely crazy about them. This focus on relationships. There's 5 dimensions of the MDI: social and emotional development, connectedness, school experiences, physical health and well-being, and constructive use of time after school. We have an index we created, a composite that includes happiness, health, optimism, self-esteem, and low sadness. So each community, each school, each community actually gets an index of how many kids fall within each of those domains. We also use an assets-based approach and use a metaphor of the richness of the soil, how you have to have these, do you get it, the soil? Like the idea of nutrients in the soil, they're actionable. You can actually, kids grow and flourish by the nutrients, and we identified 5 key assets from resiliency research. I also want to mention that the measure was really developed in collaboration with community and educators. So it was a team who developed the measure. The 5 key assets are supportive adult relationships, positive peer relationships, proper nutrition and sleep, positive school experiences, and participation in after-school activities. And we create these puzzle pieces that, based on how dark that piece is how rich that soil is, or how present that asset is, so to try and communicate it to these schools and stuff. And we find a direct relationship between how many assets you have and how well you are doing. And I won't go into that. So to date, this is the province of BC. We started in 2009, 2010 with 3,000 kids, and currently we have children who, approximately 5,000 children have completed it across 23 school districts in British Columbia. Here's Vancouver. I just had to show you. Isn't that pretty? It's Vancouver. We prepare reports for schools, so they get back a report of how their students are doing. Every school gets their own report, plus a district report. Each school report compares it, but this is what we do that's very unique. We map students' well-being by postal code, by where they live, not the school district. So what we find is, and I'll just show you this one map. So this is British Columbia, this is Vancouver. If any of you have been there, there's 23 neighborhoods. The background, the colors of blues, are socioeconomic status. So the darker colors are higher socioeconomic status. The lighter colors, in Vancouver, we have a west side and an east side. The east side is considered more poverty. The west side is considered more wealth, with higher degrees of wealth. What you can see then is in each neighborhood an index of how many children have the green who are thriving, how many are doing well, and how many would be considered vulnerable. And what you could see here by just looking across is which neighborhoods have the highest degree of kids who would be considered more vulnerable. And what you see, which is interesting, there's not a direct correlation between socioeconomic status and child well-being. So you could, in fact, look at an area like Kerrisdale, sorry if you can't see it, this one over there, that has a high degree, it's very high SES, but a high degree of kids who, a lower degree of kids who are thriving. But if you look up there at the west end, a very light color blue, that's lower socioeconomic status, you see a larger degree of kids thriving. We also present, this is again by neighborhood, the percentage of kids thriving, but then we also present by the number of assets. So again, this is the adult relationships, and you could look across the entire city to see how students are doing. And here's peer relationships mapped, after-school activities, as well as nutrition and sleep. One of the other things that we do with the MDI, and I imagine I have like a minute, something like that? Okay. Is that we also ask students what they do after school, but we don't always just ask them what they are doing. We ask them if they're doing what they wish to be doing, And if they're not, what do they wish to do after school? Now, what's so unique to me, at least, when I started looking for other surveys, I could not find any survey where they actually asked kids what they wish to be doing after school. And here you see, interestingly, 63% of the students said they're not doing what they wish to do after school. And when we asked them, the majority of students said physical and or outdoor activities was their #1 wish for after school time. Is there a problem with childhood obesity in your country? It's so interesting about the mismatch about how many kids are going home doing sedentary activities on the computer. We did ask them on the computer, watching TV with their cell phones, doing homework all at the same time, right? And how many wish to be active, And so to me, this idea of us really going to youth and figuring out what they need. And just, I also wanted to say each community across those 23 neighborhoods gets their own report that unpacks all of their community and their assets, as well as where they action, and we call it actionable items. So I'm not going to go, I'm just going to tell you, I'm not going to go past that. But the last part I want to know, and this is where we're developing it, this is a tool that's a community tool that's about schools and communities working together, and we're really trying to work on this idea of moving to action and developing tools. So we go out and present the results, hear from people what they need, and are developing an entire website where they can go for all their tools to work together to move forward. And thus, if you can go, this is all on the website. And just to end with a quote, we cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build the youth for our future. Thank you.